quick introduction to CTQ is we help teams and individuals up level for staying future relevant. And the CTQ Smartcast live sessions are all about helping you add different arrows to your quiver as you're trying to be future relevant. So in the past, these sessions have been on topics like use of improv for learning. Is artificial intelligence growing smarter than you? Personal information management was something in this space where we also covered some of what we were discussing earlier with Ravi Shankar. We did remote working. Last session was on coding and computational thinking. So coming to today's session, our guest is Ravi Shankar Iyer. Hi, welcome Ravi to this session. Been a participant for some of our earlier R3 calls as well. So happy to have you here as a guest today.
Thanks, Harish. Thanks. Look forward.
Yeah. So today's session is about how to make storytelling a part of your future stack. Ravi is one of the most appropriate guests for something like this because he is a story coach and founder of Story Rules, where he does these workshops and tells people how to get better at storytelling. And if any of you have been following, Ravi Shankar Iyer on LinkedIn, you would have seen his series of 40 stories for 40, right? When he turned 40. So that is a great example of how to actually, practice what he preaches as well. So we thought, this is the ideal, person to talk to about storytelling. So what we'll be doing today is we'll try to pick his brains on what storytelling is all about and what should we learn, what should we think about when we talk about storytelling. And you can also send in your questions using chat. We have a set of questions that we've already lined up for him. And if you have any questions, you can post them on the chat or raise your hand, and I'll come to you as and when there's time for that. So let's get started. First few questions from our side, Ravi.
Yeah, sure.
First question, I think that's something that you would have heard a lot, very often. So there's this notion that storytelling is for the creative types, right? And then what will the hard-nosed people from the world of logic and numbers and hard areas like science and accounting and finance, what do they do about storytelling? So how do you respond to a question like this?
No, yeah, I know. I've probably it was in my mind too, that as a question. And I remember when I was in consulting 2005 to 11, and often people would say, "Arey, story is not coming out," and I'd be like, "I'm not telling stories. I'm telling you the information." So I think it took me some time to realize. And now the way I approach it is that storytelling can be defined in a narrow way or in a broad way. The narrow way is probably what sometimes people allude to when they say it's a creative domain, where they say telling your own personal story, being active on stage, and those are some manifestations of the word storytelling. But for me, I prefer a broader definition of the word storytelling. And sometimes it can even approach saying that is all communication storytelling? Probably not all, but whenever you're trying to communicate to either inform or persuade somebody of something, it's not like a regular where are you right now, that's not probably storytelling. But if I'm trying to explain something to you, inform you about something which is slightly complex, or most often when I'm trying to persuade you to do something, and in that doing, I will be using sometimes some data, sometimes a lot of data. In that situation, for me, you are going to be telling a story with that data to that person. And you may use a human story, a human interest story in that telling. That may be one element or one type of story. But to me, just that entire communication, where do you start your pitch or communication from? How do you then go to the next step? What is the flow of your sentences? How do you end? What examples do you use? What analogies do you use? How many human stories do you put in there? all of those together is like a very wide umbrella of techniques, all of which I call as storytelling techniques, right? So to give you an example of a very hard-nosed business type who are masters in storytelling, you take McKinsey and Company, right? Some of the most powerful data storytelling frameworks have emerged from there. So of course, they are originally Greek, derived frameworks, but yeah, anyway. So for example, in communicating a lot of information, complex information in one place, there is something known as a pyramid principle, and that came out of McKinsey, out of a lady called Barbara Minto, who would see all these decks made by consultants who are a lot of rich in information but not clear at all. So storytelling techniques using including the pyramid principle drives clarity. So that was one example. Then there are guys who have come up with charting techniques. So there's a guy called Gene Zelazny, again a McKinsey guy, who came up with saying what kind of charts do you use to convey what information. That's visual storytelling. So yeah, a long answer to the question, but to me, storytelling is a very broad concept, and everybody needs to use it. Whether or not you're using data.
Right, right. So, just to make it more obvious to people, can you give a concrete example of a story,
Hmm.
where people have actually used data as part of the story telling? And
Hmm.
what are the key elements of a great story? If you can,
Hmm.
address both those
Hmm.
questions here.
So in fact, yeah, I mean, I when I teach storytelling, it has to be driven through examples, right? Because it can't be in a vacuum. So you will find examples all around, and Steve Jobs would have uses a lot of examples. Elon Musk, again, super hard nosed business guy, uses examples with data and in telling his stories. But I wanted to take something which is more closer to home and which is regular. So some of my examples are from Indian corporates. So there is this fascinating, simple, but to me, a very cool example of data storytelling. So is it okay if I show it on the screen?
Yes, let me just make sure that you can share it. Yeah, now you
Okay,
should be able to share
so
it.
the context is that this is Hindustan Unilever, Indian behemoth, and their investor presentation. So all of these companies that make investor presentations, typically it's a finance section domain, right? They are the guys who are tasked with making it. Some companies may have an investor relations cell, and often it's some poor CA like me who's trying to say, "Acha, investor ko we have to show this." And what they end up doing, most of these investor presentations are just data dumps. They just put all this and then hope and pray that the CFO or the CEO, whoever is going to be taking them through, will kind of manage it. But sometimes ever so often you'll come across these vivid examples of imaginative storytelling, not just basic telling the message on the slide. So I have this example wherein this is, I think, the 2015 deck, investor deck, and they want to talk about their volume growth. So let me pull up the slide. All right. So what you can see at the bottom is the data on what they call as underlying volume growth, UVG. So they want to just tell you that, okay, in March, June, September, and December, 4 quarters of the year, they had positive volume growth. Now they could have just shown this as their main chart on the slide and then said, what guys, great job, right? So applaud us. But the investors would have been like, what, September and December were good, but March and June not so good, guys, you could have done better. And which is why they anticipated that, so they wanted to give them the context. So what they did really well here in this slide is gave the right context, and context is a very critical element in storytelling. So how did they do that? They said this was a year in which commodity prices fell. The commodities is raw oil, and as a raw material, it's a critical input into the FMCG industry. I should be happy, right, that my raw material costs are falling, my profits will increase. Unfortunately, when those prices fall, it falls for everybody in the industry. And then suddenly you have a lot of small players who mushroom. I love the the visual use of that, mushrooms to indicate that a lot of small players are mushrooming. And so what did HUL do to ensure that their volumes don't fall because of these price competition by the small players? They reduce their price. So they're of course using some fairly fancy corporate speak by saying corrected the price value equation. So that's basically saying we reduce price. And then they had up trading across portfolio. Basically people who are buying Rin would buy maybe Surf Excel and so on, right? So all of that will happen. And then because of that, their volumes went up in all the 4 quarters. So this is a story of 2015. Great. Now, what makes the story special is not just this, is the example that the comparison that they gave as a contrast to this. So what was the comparison? They said similar story happened in 2009. And now I want to actually go back before telling you the 2009 story, right? Normally, when you have 2015 data, what would you compare that with? Which year would you normally compare that with?
The previous year, usually
Previous year, right? So
previous
you'd
year.
say that nobody's going to fire you for comparing 2014 and 15.
Right.
But somebody saw that and realized, no, 2014 context was different. 13, no. 12, no. 11, no. 10, no. 2009 was a similar context here. Why? 2009 also commodity prices fell by maybe a larger margin, a little bit larger. So that's why they've shown a couple of extra mushrooms on this part. And then they're saying that year we screwed up. So they are kind of showing themselves in a bad light, but in for that contrast effect. And that year we screwed up. We did not respond to raw material price changes. And then here is a contrasting piece of evidence, right? 3 out of 4 quarters, their volumes fell. Not just it did not like stagnate; it fell. And in a growth economy like India, of course, it's a 2009, but still, for a growth company like HUL, falling volumes would have given them a big firing from the headquarters. They took the firing then, but they're using it to their advantage now, right? And it's not, I'm not saying they are being manipulative or whatever. They are able to tell the story because they are having the clarity to say that 6 years back was the same right norm or context. And so the principle of storytelling that they're using here is one of contrast and what I call as norm and variance, which means that showing any piece of data on its own doesn't make sense. You have to contrast that with the right comparison. What is the right comparison? That is something that you will know as a industry leader, and your conscience will know, because often people try to pick out a comparison that makes them look good, which is risky, because if you ignore the right comparison and pick out just something that makes you look good, then once the audience figures that out, you will lose your reputation, which is a far more valuable thing to lose. So here I'm assuming that they have not done that. So if they have taken this in all good faith, then I think there's a great example of a good data story, that going back in time and figuring out the right comparison, showcasing that, showing the difference, and then the investors or the audience is left thinking, wow, that's amazing, you guys did really well in a similar context, and so well done.
Right.
So this is, I thought, a good example of hard-nosed data finance folks using data storytelling principle.
Yeah. A question that struck me while you were describing that, and I think you addressed it to a certain extent, but is it fair to say that you need to have the narrative in mind first and then look for data, or you take the data and see what is the narrative that is emerging? Because different presentations, different stories will have different objectives. If this is an investor presentation, you probably need to justify whatever you have done. There might have been a reason
Correct.
there, but then if you're just putting out, say, a long form blog post, you are looking at data and you are probably going to be narrow, selective there already. So is there a danger there, and how do you do this? Do you start with the narrative first, then pick data? What's your recommendation for doing that?
So definitely data first, right? I mean, the narrative will be a fairly early kind of step in the storytelling process. It will come before the slides and the visuals, but the data will come before that for sure. Having said that, there are some situations where you do have a broad narrative in your mind. For example, if I'm pitching to an investor, I have a narrative that this is an attractive industry. My company is doing well, so please invest. Now, it's very unlikely that I will go with a narrative that don't invest. Yeah, I mean, of course, I should have the honesty and the authenticity to look at the data and say, hey, this actually is not making a great case. I need to work on I need to work on my outcomes, and so on, right? So it at some level goes back to the Aristotelian thing of ethos, pathos, logos, right? So which is, the logos is a logic, which is the data and the numbers, etc. The pathos is the emotional element. The ethos is your, it kind of the word of ethics, and which is your credibility. Who is it that is saying? And once or twice you might get away with a narrative that is divorced from the data, but soon it's a matter of when and not if you will be found out by a smart audience, and then the long term damage to reputation is so much more. that it's not worth it. So it's always better to let the data drive your narrative and not the other way around. And yeah, of course, the exception is, as I mentioned, situations where you have a broad overall narrative, as long as the data is following that.
Right, right. Yeah. Most people who are there on this call today probably understand the value of storytelling. I
Hmm.
think that's a given. Uh, like I was mentioning to you a couple of days ago, if I take my own example, storytelling is system two. It is effortful. It doesn't come naturally to me. I know the value of storytelling, but it doesn't come naturally to me. So what should people like us do to improve our storytelling game, both in terms of spotting a story and telling it? What would you recommend people like us should be doing?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. And system one, system two also comes in the reader. So I'd in fact start from there, because if you don't put in the effort to convey a simple, clear story, like how I don't know if you read the Nut Graph, or the articles from the Ken, right?
Hmm.
They have put in a lot of system to effort to make sure that when we are reading it, almost we are not engaging our system too much, because it flows so easily from para to para, or a Malcolm Gladwell or a Sid Monga piece, or all of these guys who write so well. And so I can kind of say that you should write using system 2 so that the reader can read using system 1. And I obviously, when you're writing using system 2, is not easy because it is effortful. And oftentimes I find myself doing it, right? I go with saying, acha, I just write down quickly, and then like, Arey yaar, I am supposed to be a storyteller and I've not used this human story here at all. And that happens. So because you do revert to ease of doing things, that friction element is there. It's yeah, practice is definitely, I think, one critical piece of it, that you keep doing it again and again, and slowly, hopefully, even the difficult system 2 type parts will become a part of doing it, and it becomes system 1. So for example, pyramid principle for me initially took some time. Now it is almost system 1. I don't need to really think separately, oh I must use that. I will always think in headers, next levels, and all of that. Coming to the story spotting thing, right? So uh, I think the biggest way to spot a good story, and a good story for me is something where the audience reads it and is surprised and wants to know more. So the two biggest levers or emotions that you have to engage to hold the audience's attention, fickle, lowering attention, are surprise, which kind of grabs their attention, makes them want to know more, and curiosity, which is kind of holding their attention and continues to do that. So, as a story spotter, you must look for stuff which surprises you, which makes you want to know, oh, really? How did that happen? I want to know more. And so of course, it comes with some practice that, a good storyteller will look at a piece of data differently than a normal guy. And, there are so many examples of this. So, if you look at, I see cricket, and a cricket info writer also sees cricket. To me, Rohit Sharma coming and holding out to Nathan Lyon, seems like, yeah, what a idiot. Why did he do that? But when I read Sid Monga's piece in that, he's able to give me the entire context and then tell me that he was actually not a foolish shot. He was taking a calculated risk. It didn't come off. So don't blame him. So one comes from experience, that, you should know that space reasonably well to know what is surprising about that thing that happened, whatever, that data point. Sometimes it's just pure curiosity, not letting go things which should surprise you. So I'll give you a brilliant example that I came across last week. So there's this great podcast called How I Built This, right, by Guy Raz. And so in that, he's interviewing Tim Ferriss, the human guinea pig, the guy who's written all these bestsellers, and the Tim Ferriss show, podcaster. And so he's asking him about his first entrepreneurial venture. So Tim Ferriss, before he wrote the book, he was having a small kind of a startup, you could say, selling these body supplements, or, brain supplements or something like that. And he was a hustler. He was doing this, out of his apartment. He was like early 20s and crazy stuff. So Garaz was asking him some questions about, how did you manage to sell, did you sell on online Yebo? So he said, I tried multiple things, and one, yeah, somehow the conversation went into saying I got a full page advertisement in a leading magazine, in one of these sports magazines, at a very low price. It was a $20,000 full page thing. I managed to get it at $2,000. And then what I did was I went to a couple of wholesalers and told them, you know what, I've got this full page ad, and when people see the ad, they'll want to buy. If you commit to buying $15,000 worth of stock from me, I will put your number as the preferred wholesaler. And he got that wholesaler to buy. So basically, 15,000 committed, 2,000 cost of the advertisement, 13,000 rupees he had logged in before even putting the ad. So now this is what he says, right? Normally, any other interviewer would say, "Oh, very interesting," and then what happened after that, right? But Guy Raz stops because he realizes this is interesting. How did a 22, 23-year-old kid have the ability to think of a strategy like this? I can't. I'm 41. I can't think of it like that, right? So that's the immediate thing that made him spot the story, because he spotted the surprise in it. That was that was unusual. That was not normal. And then he asks him, and then what emerges from that simple question, that hey, how did you learn to do this, was even more fascinating, because then Tim Ferriss goes to tell him that when I was young, and young means early teens, I had insomnia. So okay, an early teenager having insomnia, what would they do? They would sit up watching some movies on cable, right? But no, this guy would watch infomercials on TV. And okay, infomercials are those random, they push to sell you stuff, right? How interested would you to be to a watch infomercials and then b learn from them? But this guy was nuts. He would watch all these infomercials and then try and figure out what is working. So he might order some good, so he will say, okay, this information is so good, I want to buy. And then he will put in some piece of paper that this particular pitch by this infomercial made me want to buy. And then he will return one of the products to see how was the return process. So basically he was doing all this from a very young age. And this insight of saying that and later, sorry, Guy Raz follows that up with saying, Tim, what you did at that teenage age was not normal. That was incredible. And so that for me was a good example of story spotting, that your whiskers, your nose is always turned up for saying what is surprising in this data, what is surprising in what you're telling me, and not letting it go but digging deeper. And that's where some interesting insights might come.
Right. Yeah. So, one more question, Ravi. So, you know, uh, we may want to use stories in some of these high stakes, occasions like an investor pitch or something like that. But then if you're not good enough, those occasions may not land that well. So what can we do as practice grounds to get better at storytelling? Should we be looking at maybe starting a newsletter, blogging more, just to get ourselves better at this, basically safer practice grounds where the stakes are lower, and then get better at this, so that this comes off well. So if that's the case, then what are the practice grounds that you recommend?
No, absolutely, Harish. I think the answer is in the title, right? That don't assume that I will only tell stories when the stakes are high, and otherwise I'll just be, giving basic information, right? Because then you've not had any practice in doing that. So all those, writing is one part, but speaking is a different game, right? You may be able to write quite well, but actually speaking in front of a crowd, their reactions, everything, it's a little more different. So multiple ways to do it, I guess. Just with friends and family, maybe have story nights. If you're imaginative, I think there are so many ideas that can come, but slightly more formal ones are stuff like Toastmasters, that just helps you to talk, and you can have story sections in there. I remember this situation, right? So about 3 years back, so this was more than that, 4 years back. So I just this Captivator audio guide was launched for this historical monument tours that we had founded. And so I had written a lot of these stories for monuments, and I wanted to give a short talk about the Taj Mahal to a small group in Pune, just to kind of get that thing going. And so this is Pagdandi Cafe in sorry, that Baner Pashan Link Road. So that's where I set up a kind of a small session. About 50 people had signed up and they were supposed to come. And now in my mind, I'm going to be using slides, so I'll have something to go with. And I thought, yeah, I have worked on this for months. I have read through so many books on the Taj, and I've written this. I've written a 15,000 word essay on this. I know my stuff. I don't need to really practice. I'll see the slides and do it, right. And so as eh, I don't remember how that happened, but in the building we had like a small kind of a dry run before the Pagdandi one, and I was struggling. I had chits in my hand, I had the slides, and I was still struggling to to make sentences, and I was pausing, and I was not sure of what to say. So one critical delivery tip, and especially important for a high stake situation, is you have to have a script. You have to write it on. So it's like your story on the slide is like the screenplay, but what you're speaking is your dialogue. Dialogue needs to be there, right? So dialogues you have to write down. Now, depending upon your comfort level, your confidence, your practice, etc., that dialogue has to be kind of almost word to word. In that Taj talk I did word to word, or if you're reasonably confident enough, then key talking points. So the more you do this again and again and again and again, you will reach a position, hopefully, where you can do less and less of that written stuff, and you can kind of rely on a little bit of more extempore, but to that extent possible, I think, as much as practice as possible.
Okay, yeah. So my favorite related story is that Steve Jobs used to practice for at least more than a month his keynote presentations. So if the world's best presenter required practice, we mere mortals definitely need
Crazy,
enough
right?
and more
uh,
practice.
and with exactly the same plays, everything, the same props.
Right.
Madness. Madness.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how can we use storytelling in terms of, say, our personal branding on platforms like LinkedIn, and even, more information dense documents, say Word documents, where you are actually putting out something. It could be a slide document or a document. But what are your recommendations around, using storytelling in places like these?
So if I look at the personal branding piece, right, telling actual incident stories from your own life, they can be quite powerful, uh, with the small caveat there of you may want to be aware. So okay, so let me step back, right? So if you're talking about stories from your own life, there could be broadly two categories of stories where you come off looking good, you've done something well, and stories where you don't come off looking good. The second category is very powerful. It's more powerful than the first one, because the second one shows vulnerability, right? Your willingness to improve, to learn, to show that you're human, and it's very enduring. So you should definitely share those stories without hesitation. The first category also can be used, and that's where some language and tone comes into play, that you may want to make sure that you don't come across as boasting, and it's not all in your portfolio of stories. That should not be dominant. So, and there are, of course, then next level questions might be that how do you remember these stories? So it's tough. So in my own case, I just have an Evernote notebook where I just have individual story notes. Suddenly, I'll remember something about, hey, this happened this year, and then I'll write that down, and then whenever I get the time, I write it out. So don't rely on saying that oh, tomorrow I have a presentation and suddenly I have to remember all these stories. It's something that on an ongoing basis you keep jotting down in a place that works for you. So that's on personal branding, and if we get time, maybe I'll share a couple of stories. On the Word document or slide you meant, right? So there I think um, you need a like a three-layer thing. That actually not three. The delivery part is not there, because it's a reading document, right? So you need to first have the base of the story narrative, which comes from the data. So you have a data, and then you kind of say what is it that my overarching story narrative is, and for that, pyramid principle is superb as a structure to build that out. Then you once you have each of those messages, right, then you put on a visual hat, and even if it is a Word document, try and always see that what visuals can I use to make this easy to understand. Visuals are always, our brain has far more percentage devoted to visual processing. So if you're able to give it in a visual form, it becomes so much more easier. And then once you have the story, the narrative layer, then the visual layer sitting on top of that, the third layer could be what I call as engagement elements. So an engagement element could be an analogy that you put in to explain something which is technically difficult to understand, or a box with an incident, with a quote, with a tale, like you had a nice tale at the beginning, right? So all of those are nice kind of toppings that you can put on top. So to me, all of these, doesn't necessarily need to have a human story, but all of these are elements of storytelling.
Okay, okay. And one thing that probably just dropped, it was a stray use, which I want to pick up on. You mentioned portfolio of stories. What does that mean? And what is your take on portfolio of stories?
As in, for personal branding, right? It's you have, what is a personal brand? A personal brand is, you trying to talk about what are authentically your strengths and maybe your weaknesses, and how have you learned, and you're putting it out to the world to show who you are, so that they know you to the extent possible in an authentic manner, and they can then decide that, hey, I think what he's sharing is useful for me, let me engage with him, right? So now, in order to do that, you can have a list of your attributes and then say, hey, I'm conscientious, I'm punctual, I like order, I'm creative. You can say all those words, and sometimes LinkedIn allows you, right? What skills do you have? You can put all those skills, you can put certificates, but honestly, they're not great signaling devices, right? Because anybody can put them. It's not really differentiating you, and it's not engaging. It's not makes for great reading. So think of the skills that you believe that you're good at, and then ask yourself, where have I demonstrated this? So that demonstration would more often than not be in a real life incident, an
Right.
incident which occurred at a particular time in a particular place, where there were one or more people involved, there was some dialogue, and that has the makings of a story, right? So then the storytelling skill comes to remember that, to write it down and stuff. And so let's say there is this, you have one story which shows your thing about creativity. Similarly, you need to have other stories, other incidents which talk about other different elements of, or skills, or whatever beliefs that you want to bring out. And so this portfolio has to be balanced in terms of the different facets of your personality, also balanced in terms of things which show you in a good light, and things which show you screwing up, and snafus and stuff that you show you learn. So that, I guess, that's what I meant by portfolio,
All right.
balanced
All right.
portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned Evernote. So related question: what tools or platforms should we be thinking of, to get better at storytelling? And things have also changed, right? Earlier it
Yeah.
was more of PowerPoint and Excel. Now there's video.
Hmm.
There was Prezi for some time, which was the flavor of the season. So what are these tools and platforms that we should have in our arsenal? To get better at storytelling.
Okay, so let me break it into the process, right? So you have the 3 R's. So I have something similar which I call as the 5 C's. So the 5 C's for good storytelling, good thought leadership are, for me, consume good content. Then the second word is a little bit of a big irritate, is cerebrate, which is think. Confer, which is talk to others. Create and coach. And so for each, I guess you have different sets of tools. So for me, for the consume part, I don't know how things will change in a few years, but the Kindle has been a brilliant tool for a very long time. I think it's my number one tool, because of the highlights, and you can go back and read, and revise, etc. Also podcasts, I think. So these two have been very, very high on this. Plus, yeah, blogs, and also there's no major, like great earth-shattering tools there. The cerebrate part is where it has to be non-technical, not non-tech heavy. It should be you and your mind as much as possible. So no tools there. And in the create part, I've been Keynote once I tried, but I never got used to it. So PowerPoint works. Yeah, PowerPoint, Excel really works for me. Even some of these guys, right? So there's this Silicon Valley storytelling coach called Cole Nussbaumer Knaflick, and she brought about a lot of uh, changes in the way visuals are highlighted. So chart highlighting is a very narrow sphere in storytelling, in which she's a global leader, and pretty much a lot of people follow her lessons. And I was, thinking, oh, she must be using Tableau and D300. She uses Excel here. And he says everything broadly can be done with Excel and PowerPoint. So I think it works. So far, I have not seen something that is going to be earth-shatteringly different that, breaks that this one. Um, in terms of coaching is where there's actually a big struggle going on. There are too many. It's a big Belpuri, for want of a better word, of tools that are out there. So people are using Zoom, of course, for the actual live sessions, but for the pre-recorded videos, there are multiple platforms like Thinkific and Teachable, and all of them have their own challenges. For email newsletters, there is ConvertKit and bunch. So I've been reading up that there are these guys called Gagan Biani, who was I think Udemy founder, who is actually building a product which is dedicated to this new form of learning called cohort-based courses, which is what Tiago and David. So, in fact, I read about it by a tweet by Sajid Pai, who's been on Smartcast earlier. So, I'm looking forward because I think people like us need a good tool. I think that's the area where tools are wanting. It's very bad currently. I think the other areas there's nothing much to kind of complain.
Right, right. Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question before I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience as well. So do you think so people can actually start posting questions in the chat so that I know whom to go to. Yeah. So coming back to my last question on in this segment. So do you think storytelling is going to be relevant in say 2030?
So I think it was relevant in 2000 BC. I think it will continue to be relevant because it's persuasion, right? And if you're still following what Aristotle taught us, then I think it will remain relevant. It may the name may change. Maybe a new buzzword may take shape. I don't know, but critical thinking, storytelling, collaboration, leadership. These are like timeless skills. So I really think it'll always be relevant.
Right. Yeah. Naveen, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi. So I hope this doesn't come across as a smart ass question. It is not intended to be that. I really want to explore. So I want to know use of, how and where did you use storytelling concepts in this presentation itself for Ravi and
Sure.
for Harish, because obviously you are also a fan of storytelling. So did you also do something like that? And what else could you have done now thinking back on it?
Should I go first?
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks, Naveen. It is, yeah, that's always in the mind, right? So, and this kind of goes back to Harish's point that system one, system two. So, we have to engage system two to bring in some of those elements. Otherwise, system one will just tell you the gyan. But, if I go back, and to be fair, to be honest, I did ask Harish for some of these questions and it was useful for me to mull over them. Otherwise, maybe on the spur of the moment, I may not have come up with the examples. So, why do you think I had the slide ready? Because I knew that there was a question on data storytelling that was going to come. So examples are, I think, a great type of storytelling, and which is why, Naveen, I want to reiterate. For me, storytelling is not just saying once upon a time there was a
Hmm.
man, there was a king. That is not just storytelling for me, right? So it's a plethora of techniques and using vivid examples. So when I use an example, I'm using a storytelling principle called show, don't tell. I
Yeah.
don't tell you that hey, use a great example and use norm variance. I'm showing you an example, right? When I wanted to tell you about norm variance and spot the story, I had the example of Guy Raz and Tim Ferriss ready with me, and of course it was recent, but so I think those are things that help. Even giving um, frameworks that can be used, thinking about those like the 5 C's framework. Those are things that for me, all of those are, see, anything that you are then able to remember and maybe use. If I have given you something that you're able to remember after a week after the session, I have succeeded. That to me is like kind of success in this endeavor, right? So could I have done better? Yes, I think maybe one or two personal stories could have been added here. In fact, I was thinking about that in the personal branding. Maybe if we've got time, then we can do that. Yeah. So but Yeah, okay. So that, I think Ganesh's question has been answered. So do you want me to go ahead and share that personal story?
I would love it. Depends on the rest.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so so
Ravi,
there's
sorry,
a
Ravi, just to butt in. I think the question he had, Ganesh had, was about the latter name that you mentioned, the long name about the
Yeah.
chart highlighting.
which one? Sorry, I'm blanking
The
out now.
one that we spoke about someone.
Oh, Cole is
No,
Bhavana. Okay, there is
yeah,
Cole.
I tried
I'm going to
searching, but
warn you.
it was hard.
I'm going to warn you. Okay. Her book is called Storytelling with Data. Her website is called Storytelling with Data. She does visual storytelling with data, visual highlighting of storytelling with data. Her narrative chops are very ordinary. So don't go to learn on narrative from her. That to me is, I think, more critical in a story. But her visual chops are exemplary. Sure, Naveen, the story, right? So
Yeah.
uh, this I was part of the 40 Stories collection, and this happened in 2019 Jan, I think, when I was in Bangalore for a workshop. Actually, not a workshop; it was like a day-long seminar organized by a large IT company, global IT company, and they had their analytics group, which was about a large number. In that, there was like a big auditorium that they had hired in the heart of Bangalore, and 400 people in that room. So you can imagine, right? And what they had basically done was get some of the stalwarts from the analytics domain and get them to come and talk to the audience. And I was also one of the speakers, and I was the last speaker of the day. My topic was storytelling with data. So the advantage of going in early was I could see some of the other guys, so that was useful. I could reference some of their points and all. But what kind of shook me a little was the guy just before me. So he's this middle-aged types guy, 45, 50, balding, typical corporate attire, and he comes on stage and looks almost like a professor. And you're going to I was thinking, I'm going to hear a lecture. Hopefully people won't doze off. So mine was at about 5, his was at about 4 o'clock, right? So the next 45 minutes when he talked, no one was quiet. There was laughter throughout that 45 minutes. He was a rock star. He was like giving movie references and inside jokes, and just not stopping. Yeah, he was brilliant. This guy is actually quite well known. His name is Shubho, Allstate Insurance, I think, head of analytics or something, and incredibly entertaining guy, talking all about data science but in an entertaining way. And as he is going on, I'm laughing, but I'm sinking deeper into my seat. Shucks, I have to follow up after this guy. I was, absolutely shitting bricks. So I'm thinking, okay, I've got an opening. I know what to do, but it won't work. It's not going to be, impactful after what this guy said. And so while he's talking, I'm listening, but also furiously thinking of how do I change. And somehow, I think about something. So then, my chance comes and I go on stage. So the first thing I want to do at some level, when I'm analyzing this, at that time I didn't, so much analysis didn't happen. It was, more intuitive, but uh, the audience was still in, I mean, they were still enthralled by him, right? So they were still, I think, in their mind thinking about, oh my God, what a brilliant speaker, about Shubho. I didn't want to let go of that energy. So I actually started off by using that by saying, I talked to one of the organizers saying, Prakash, I have a big complaint to make to you. You would have given me the post lunch slot. That would have been fine. Why did you give me the slot after Shubho? I mean, this guy is a rock star. What a brilliant speaker. And people clapped for Shubho again. And, I kind of say I'm born to pick with you, Shubho. You can't be, going around talking. You're like a stand-up comic. You were having people rolling in the aisles. And Shubho also laughed. The audience laughed. Somewhere my nervousness went down a little. Then I wanted to again connect what happened during the day with my topic, right? So my topic was storytelling techniques and how they can learn. So I said, okay, how many of you enjoyed some of the storytelling techniques? You found you throughout the day you had so many guys coming and talking to you. How many of you would like to talk as well as some of these speakers today? Please put up your hands. Almost all hands went up. How many of you think you can do that right now? Almost all hands went down. And then I said, I am not all of these guys who came and talked to you before, they are like Sachin Tendulkar and Viv Richards and Virat Kohli. They are brilliant at batting. I'm not a Tendulkar or a Virat Kohli, but I'm like a Ramakant Atrekar or a Sanjay Bangar who will help you learn from some of their techniques and become better at what you do, become better at your craft. Let me tell you how. And then I kind of went with the speech, right? So this incident, now I'm just going to stop here, and this is my incident that I shared with you. What do you infer about me as a person, about me as a brand from this story?
Nice. So, I mean, what I take away is one, thinking on your feet, be focusing on the message that needs to go out rather than anything else. So, those are the two that immediately come to mind.
Great. Shrikant is saying stand out from the previous speaker without knocking either of you two. Learning from others. Yeah, Manish. So now great points, right? And I'm sure you can build on this. Now, if I stand up, say, you know what, guys, well done, Shubho. I'm a guy who's, I'm very quick on my feet and I'm very intuitive in my thinking, and I'm very adaptable. The room will die of boredom. So I can't say those words, so I have to demonstrate it. So again, it goes down to show don't tell only. But so that's an example of a personal branding story. So these incidents keep happening in our life. It's that story spotter who has to look at it and say, hey, that was different, that was unusual, that was not like a normal talk, it was something different. So let's share that. And more often this was from a portfolio point of view, this was a rare situation where it was like a positive one. More of those stories are where I've goofed up and goofed up bad. So yeah, so you can read some of those. I'll share the link of that 40 stories thing. It might give you a sense of what I'm talking about. All right, so let's look at some of the more questions.
And Naveen, just to round up
sorry, I missed
my
that.
part of it, I had a bunch of questions. I actually sequenced them in a certain order so that I can shepherd, Ravi into these things, and wanted to take this logical break at, this question about whether it's going to be relevant in 2030 and open it up for the audience, expecting someone like you asking a question like this.
Superb. No, yeah. So, I've attended some sessions where people have asked questions before and, stuff, but this is mind blowing in terms of the detail of the question. These are questions that you want to grapple with. And I'm so glad that, I attended this. It's been great fun. Okay. So, Ramanand, right? So do you try to build taste exposure to different kinds of storytelling through fiction? Oh, that's a great one. I struggle with fiction, yeah, Ramanand. I don't know how and why. And it's definitely, making me a lesser storyteller for sure, right? So it's very, if I look back in my life, till my 10th grade, I was only reading fiction and all the usual stuff, right? You start with Tinkle Amar Chitrakatha, blah, blah, and then you move on to Famous Five, then Hardy Boys, and then you move on to graduate to Sydney Sheldon and Arthur Haley and all of that. And 10th vacation, I remember I would go to the library, pick up 4 books, come back to my aunt's house, spend the whole day reading. I basically didn't have any life then. And somehow I think I tripped, some like tripping or wire happened. And after that, I moved to nonfiction. I don't know why. So I've hardly read any fiction after that. So my fiction consumption happens through movies, and I definitely try and look out for good movies that are good on stories. But I think I should read the classics. It's a wish. I think I'm missing out on something. But one book that I'm reminded of it's actually a non-fiction book, but it draws from fiction for its interpretations. Is this book called The Elements of Eloquence by Mark Forsyth, I think Mark Forsyth. In case you guys have not read it, it's, I think, by far one of the most entertaining books I've read. It's there in my phone ka Kindle as a downloaded book. Anytime I feel bored and I don't know what to read, I'll open that up. You can read it again and again and again, and brilliant. Forsyth is a genius. So, but yeah, I need to pick up more fiction.
Shrikant has a question. Is there a criteria you use to spot a story, to segregate a story based on its impact, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think how it spoke to me, Shrikant, and at some level, did it surprise me enough for it to be shared? But more than that, I think the criteria is that, I might have found something very surprising, but then will it resonate with the audience? So every story has a time and place for, depending upon who the audience is. So I have a brilliant cricket story, but if I'm talking to a bunch of Americans, and it won't resonate at all, right? So it's going to be a jugalbandi between saying who's the audience, what can they relate to, and what will resonate with them, and what connects with me. So it has to be a mix of those two. That would be the two criteria I'd use. Yeah, there are stories all around us, absolutely right. So which is why, I mean, um, at some level, when I started off, I was trying to find stories in history. When I started off in my startup in history storytelling, and I was very fascinated by the history stories, but unfortunately the audience was not, and there were not enough of an audience to do it. So business has a bigger take, and sometimes you have to be careful with those criteria, right? It's the formula for getting famous on LinkedIn is not too difficult. You just follow startups and write about famous startups, or you write about famous speeches. So once in a while I've done that also, but it becomes formulaic, and what will sell, right, in that sense. So some of that you have to be careful of, but it's a balance between what really speaks to you and what you think the audience is keen to know about.
Right. I think final question from Ramanand. Inside corporate worlds, are there people or times where storytelling can be counterproductive? What do you caution your students about?
Can you elaborate a bit on the question, Ramanand? Because do you use the word storytelling in a particular context or meaning?
I was just following up on what you, when you answered Shrikant's question, you said there are different audiences, you kind of think about what works. So is there a place? So I remember, there will be always people for whom this notion that you're telling a story feels inauthentic because there is something about that situation, or the person has had his share of bad storytellers.
Sure.
So, or maybe you can just, you can just tell us, what do you caution your students about? What do you tell them the right way, or what should they avoid?
So the big caution is always keep your audience's preferences in mind. And now even a person who is hard nosed, does not like the human element, and that's a big challenge, right? They don't like anecdotes, for example. And often when we talk about a story, we assume it's an anecdote, and people hate anecdotal evidence. They want to see the numbers and the data. But a hard-nosed McKinsey consultant telling a story with data is using storytelling principles. So for me, the caution is figure out what type of storytelling principle will work with you. But it is ultimately going to be some storytelling principle. I mean, you can't say that I will confuse you with poorly drafted slides and just give you all the data, and that is what I think will be the best justice, because you're not a person who likes a quote unquote story. I think you're not doing justice for both the time that he's going to be spending and what you could do. So a very clear left brain approach to storytelling, engineering that story, is also possible. But so the real caution is keep that audience in mind. The audience has I like to say that they have a right on everything except the facts and your considered opinion. Those are the two things that you should not change based on the audience. But they want data heavy slides, sure, give it to them. They want to 12-point font, give it to them. They want a pink color font, that doesn't matter. Those are all peripheral things. So the audience rules everything except for the data and your opinion. And just tailor your storytelling approach for the audience. You don't have to say that for this audience I will not do storytelling.
So Manish had had an additional point to Raman's question, that that people may be more experienced with storytelling as well. So how do you handle that scenario there? They've actually heard good stories.
No, I didn't understand that. Sorry,
so I think Raman's question was that people may not, people may consider storytelling.
Let me clarify.
Yeah, sure, Manish.
So, for example, there might be a senior folks out there who might have seen the world and those kind of things. And then obviously it doesn't make sense to trying giving stories to them because they have seen it, know it. So in that scenario, how do you change the tracks?
So I mean, I've not done a good job of conveying this point. I think so. A story is not the once upon a time thing. Sentences can be a story if it is in a logical, organized manner. So um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe okay. So you could read two contrasting pieces of or ebooks that I have written, right? And to me, both are examples of storytelling. So one is leaders giving speeches. So there is a Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Narendra Modi. All of them have given speeches, which you not necessarily call them as stories, right? I'm sure leaders look up to all these guys. So Jeff Bezos, for example, when he is trying to convince the US Congress that the antitrust, they should not break up Amazon. So he's telling a lot of statements there. He's using some personal stories also, which is, I think, the personal story is the thing that hits people a lot. They feel that, Array, that I don't like as a leader. Sure, don't use that, but you're conveying information, right? In what order are you saying the sentences? You have to decide that order, right? Deciding that order is storytelling. And I don't know how many more times I have to say that to, because there's an art and a craft of doing that. It's not easy to say that I'll just say in any order because this guy doesn't mind. But every guy has a way of understanding something. So in what order, what will you start your sentence with, what will you end your that communication with? That is a storytelling principle, and that comes in the pyramid principle. So I'll share a couple of these books. Both of them are in my as an ebook that you can subscribe to. Maybe I'll send it to Harish and he can forward it to you guys.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I think Naveen had one clarification. He wanted to know which one is the book, because there seem to be two books by Mark Forsyth. One is How to Turn the Perfect English Phrase, and the other is Secrets of the Perfect Turn of Phrase. Which one is the original?
Oh, the Elements of Eloquence is the name of the book. Does it have two of those? So I'm not. I've read only one of his, which is the Elements of Eloquence.
Sure.
But his writing is so good that you pick up anything here. I think all of them will be really good.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So I think we have already crossed our time limit. Had a great session. We will want to end the session on a slightly fun note with a couple of quiz questions. But thanks a lot, Ravi, for patiently answering all the questions, and like Shrikant said, playing to my tune since I was the interviewer today. Going wherever I was shepherding you to.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So let me just bring the presentation.
This is great fun, yeah. So no, really, very high quality questions, and I'm going to just share the other book that I mentioned,
Yes.
which is on the pyramid principle.
And as a lead up, to this session, we had done a contest around, where the question was, "What's your favorite real life story of change from the world of business, sports, or culture?" And there was a prize for 15% discount on any Story Rules course. And Ashwin Bhandarkar is the one who's won this, and his submission was the transformation of MS Subbulakshmi's persona from that of a Devadasi musician to that of the epitome of Cambram womanhood, and how it was wrought by Sadashivam, her husband, through a series of calculated moves over the years. It's a fascinating story about the building and strengthening of a cultural brand. I think this is a great example of narrative building, as they say, right? So Ashwin Bhandarkar has interests across multiple things: technology, music. So which shows in his choice of another story that he picked up, and that's why he's the winner of this contest that we have.
Is there a book, Ashwin, that where you read this about?
I'm not sure if Ashwin is there on the call today.
He may not be there. Okay. Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
All right, so let's come to the last section, short section. So quiz questions where you can take a shot at this. Everyone is open to take a shot at these questions in the chat. I can't see the chat right now. Let me open that up. So yeah, so the first one is, this is an urban legend. a 6-word story that is said to have won Ernst Hemingway a wager of $10. So what's the story that we're talking about? Yeah, Shrikant and Ravi both have got it right. So the urban legend being that he won this, but the variations of this story had appeared before, when Hemingway is supposed to have had this wager with his friends and all that. So yeah, there are different variations. Maybe 6 or 7 words is what we have seen, different variations of this. Okay, the next question is, the hero's journey is this famous story framework that most well-known popular stories seem to be following. So there are 12 different steps. So we want you to just arrange these in the correct order. So if you think of any famous,
this is horrible. Yeah, what a difficult question. Really. In fact, I teach the hero's journey as a as a framework, but modified for business. And I have seen that circle so many times, but even I will struggle to organize this. This is crazy.
Yeah. So Shrikant, why don't you unmute yourself? Shrikant and Ravi, why don't you just Shrikant refuses the call? No.
Ramanand, that is brilliant. Ramanand, that's brilliant.
Yeah, Shrikant, why don't you unmute and you and Ravi can actually decipher this
you
for us.
need Ramanand. You need to become the mentor and convince Shrikant to take up the challenge. Give him the elixir though.
Totally. Give me all the elixir you can. All right. Do you want to start off with the first one, Ravi?
So I think it's the Call of Adventure, which is Ordinary World. Ordinary World is number 1. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, Ordinary World is number 1, and you've actually given me the next one, which is the Call of Adventure.
Correct.
After that, hold on. I'm actually struggling to understand where to go. After the Call of Adventure, he will
Refusal of the call.
refuse the call.
Yes.
Yeah, he will refuse the call, and then meet the mentor.
Yeah, I think so. Must be meet the mentor. Yeah.
Yeah, he will meet the mentor and cross the first threshold.
Nice. Perfect. Yes, that should be there. Yeah.
After crossing the first threshold, he will
Ordeal or test allies and enemies.
either one of the ordeal probably will come last. So after crossing the first threshold, he'll have tests, he'll meet allies, he'll have enemies.
Just allies, enemies. Now we are in Rivendell.
Sorry, there's some LOTR reference. Kya? No.
Yeah.
No, I have not seen that.
Naveen not making an LTR reference at least once in a conversation is unheard of. So I'm glad it has finally come. All right. After test allies, enemies, they will. I think that's when the ordeal comes.
Yeah.
They will have an ordeal. They will approach the innermost cave.
ठीक है?
They are supposed to fail massively somewhere, or
that's
the ordeal.
That's the ordeal. Yeah.
That's the ordeal.
Yeah.
Then they will approach the innermost cave.
I'm trying to understand the reward and resurrection में क्या होगा? Road back should be the last one, right?
Yeah. The road back is the last. Return with the elixir is the one before last. There will have to be a resurrection before the reward. So or test allies enemies, the ordeal. No, the test allies enemies approach to the innermost cave, the ordeal, then the resurrection, the reward, the road back, then the resurrection, the reward, return with the elixir, and the road back. Or no, the return with the elixir.
Road back and return with the elixir. Kya? Road back.
Yeah. Return with the elixir and the road back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So perfect. You finally cracked it, both of you.
I should be whatever, sinking in some shallow pool of water right now.
Yeah. All right. And the final one, written by a mathematician, which children's book was loved by Queen Victoria but hated by the original illustrator.
I know. It contains the Jabberwocky is all I'm going to say.
Yes. It is Alice in Wonderland. So you got that right. So that brings us to an end this great session on storytelling.